24 hours ago, Elena was bleeding on a restaurant floor, taking a knife meant for a billionaire's little girl. Now she was waking up in a bed that definitely wasn't hers. Her fingers sank into silk sheets, not the rough, faded fabric from her tiny studio. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, washing over a room that looked like a hotel in a movie. The last thing Elena Torres remembered was her water-stained ceiling in Pilsen and the sound of the train outside. This was not that. Then it hit her. White tablecloth turning red. A child's scream that cut through the music. Fire tearing through her shoulder as her body moved before her brain. She was 28, a waitress who'd spent 6 years serving people who dropped her weekly pay on one bottle of wine. And yet, she'd stepped in front of a gun for a stranger's daughter. In the middle of that fog, one voice pushed through, the last thing her mother ever told her. Finish what you start, no matter how long it takes. Elena thought the worst was over when she hit the floor. She was wrong. Waking up in this mansion was not a happy ending. It was the start of something much darker. Before the truth hits, tap that subscribe button, because this story is about to get intense. And tell this in the comments. Would you risk everything for a child you've never met? Tuesday evening, October 2024. Romano's Italian bistro sat on Michigan Avenue like a jewel box. All exposed brick and Edison bulbs, Italian marble floors that probably cost more than Elena's car. The soft jazz floating through the dining room made everything feel smooth, elegant, like the world outside didn't exist. For the people eating here, maybe it didn't. Elena Torres moved through the restaurant the way she'd learned to move through life, quietly, carefully, making herself small. Her feet screamed inside the cheap non-slip shoes she'd bought at Payless 3 months ago. The soles were wearing through on the left side. She had another 4 hours on this double shift before she could sit down. In her locker, tucked behind her purse, was her nursing textbook. Fundamentals of Patient Care, 8th edition. She'd read 3 pages during her 10-minute break, standing up because sitting made it harder to get moving again. 6 years of night classes, 1 chapter at a time, stolen moments between refilling water glasses and clearing plates. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She waited until she reached the kitchen to check it. Daniel got accepted to the robotics competition finals. Needs $300 registration fee by Friday. Elena leaned against the wall, reading it twice. $300. That was groceries for 3 weeks. That was the electric bill. That was the reason she was working this double shift in shoes that were falling apart. But Daniel was her purpose. Had been since their mother died when Elena was 19 and he was 8. 9 years of raising him alone, of being mother and sister, and the only adult standing between him and the world. Some promises aren't spoken. They're written in the DNA of who you become after someone dies in your arms. Her mother's last words weren't poetic, just take care of your brother. Elena had been doing it ever since. She texted back, that's amazing. We'll figure it out. The we was generous. There was no we when it came to money. Just Elena, her 2 jobs, and a studio apartment in Pilsen that ate half her paycheck at $1,200 a month. The landlord kept raising rent because the neighborhood was improving, which meant people like her were supposed to leave. She took the red line 45 minutes each way because parking downtown cost more than she made in tips most nights. Her 10-year-old Honda had a check engine light that had been on so long she'd stopped seeing it. Elena pushed through the swinging doors back into the dining room. The contrast always hit her. Fluorescent lights and shouted orders in the kitchen, then soft music and murmured conversations out here. 2 different worlds, separated by a door. She noticed things other servers didn't. The businessman at table 4 who'd ordered the expensive steak but hadn't touched it. His hand kept going to his phone like he was waiting for a call that wouldn't come. The teenager at table 7, whose parents were too busy checking their own phones to see she'd been crying. The couple at table 9 having a fight in whispers, smiling whenever the server approached. This skill, seeing what others missed, wasn't something she'd chosen. It was survival. You learned to read a room when you grew up with your mother's abusive boyfriend, learned to calculate which version of him was walking through the door based on the sound of his footsteps. You learned to notice the signs before the danger arrived. Elena had learned young that invisible was safe. Invisible meant you could move through spaces that would otherwise crush you. She perfected the art of being seen only when necessary, of disappearing into the background of other people's lives. She refilled water glasses at table 11, cleared empty plates from table 6, smiled when she was supposed to smile. Another 4 hours, then home, then 3 hours of sleep before her morning shift at the coffee shop, then back to Romano's tomorrow night. This was her life. Small, careful, invisible, and she'd built it deliberately, brick by brick, because anything bigger would collapse under the weight of how fragile everything was. At exactly 7:47 p.m., the atmosphere in Romano's changed. Roberto, the floor manager who never personally seated anyone, appeared at the entrance. He was walking quickly, shoulders back, wearing his nervous smile, the one reserved for people who could destroy his career with a phone call. The man behind him didn't look special at first. Tall, dark suit, tired eyes. But Elena felt the shift immediately. Conversations didn't stop exactly. They just paused for half a breath. Heads turned subtly, the way people try to look without looking. It wasn't about how he looked. It was about how the entire restaurant rearranged itself around his presence. Alexander Harrison. Elena recognized the name from the reservation list, but seeing him was different. He moved through the space like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to wait for anything. The little girl gripping his hand, maybe 7 years old, had dark curls and an expensive dress that probably cost more than Elena made in a month. She held her father's hand with white-knuckled intensity, small fingers wrapped so tight Elena could see it from across the room. Behind them walked a man in an even sharper suit, early 40s, scanning the dining room like Secret Service. His phone was already out, already checking something, his body angled to keep both the entrance and Harrison's daughter in his peripheral vision. Roberto led them to Section 3, Elena's section, the chef's table by the windows, overlooking Millennium Park. The city glittered outside like a promise. The table offered a full view of the dining room, which meant everyone could see them too. Elena approached with her rehearsed smile, order pad ready. "Good evening. Can I start you with something to drink?" Alexander Harrison barely glanced up from his phone. "Sparkling water for the table. Wine list." Just like that. Not rude, exactly. Just the casual dismissal of someone who'd never had to think about whether his words mattered to the people serving him. Elena was used to it. She'd been dismissed 1,000 times, but it still stung every single time, a small paper cut that never quite healed. "Of course, I'll be right back with that." Sophie sat rigid in her chair while her father and the assistant, Marcus, according to the reservation, immediately dove into conversation about quarterly projections and market positioning. The child didn't fidget, didn't swing her legs, didn't do any of the things 7-year-olds normally did. She was too still, the kind of still that came from fear, not obedience. Elena had seen that look before. The child wasn't moving, wasn't fidgeting, wasn't being a kid. She was calculating. Eleanor returned with the sparkling water and began reciting the evening's specials. Her voice moved on autopilot, seared scallops, truffle risotto, the grass-fed ribeye, while her eyes tracked something wrong. Sophie's gaze was locked across the restaurant with laser focus, not the wandering attention of a bored child, hunting focus, tracking something. Elena followed the little girl's line of sight to the bar. A man sat alone, mid-40s, expensive suit that didn't quite fit right. His shoulders were too broad for the tailoring, like he'd borrowed someone else's clothes. Cold eyes that swept the room in regular intervals. His hand rested inside his jacket, not casual, not comfortable, and every 30 seconds, his gaze flicked back to the Harrison table. The memory hit Elena like a fist to the chest. Daniel at 9 years old, standing in their apartment doorway, watching their mother's boyfriend stumble in drunk. Her little brother's eyes doing exactly what Sophie's were doing now, calculating which room offered escape, measuring the distance to the door, mapping survival. She'd seen that look before, the look of a child mapping escape routes. Elena's brain screamed at her, "This isn't your business. You're here to serve pasta, not play hero. Daniel needs you. Your scholarship needs you. Your life, fragile as it is, needs you to stay in your lane." But Sophie's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. A tiny movement, barely visible. No one else at the table noticed. Alexander was reviewing documents Marcus slid across the table. Marcus was typing furiously on his phone, his protective vigilance somehow missing the actual threat. Only Elena noticed. The man at the bar stood, adjusted his jacket, started walking toward their section with purpose. Elena's body moved before her brain could stop it. "Sir, can I get you anything?" She positioned herself between the bar and the Harrison table, suddenly very busy refilling water glasses at nearby tables, creating a human obstacle. The man's eyes met hers, recognition, calculation, irritation flashing across his face in sequence. He stopped walking, sat back down at the bar, ordered another scotch. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you doing? You're a waitress, not security. You're going to get fired. You're being paranoid. You're seeing threats that aren't there because you've spent your whole life waiting for the next disaster." But she thought of Daniel's scar, the faint line on his forehead that was still visible 10 years later. The night she'd failed to notice the danger signs. The night their mother's boyfriend had been too quiet, too still, and Elena had convinced herself everything was fine until it wasn't. Until Daniel's scream brought her running, and she found him on the floor, blood streaming from where his head hit the corner of the coffee table. She'd promised herself that night she would never miss the signs again. Sophie looked at Elena directly for the first time. In those dark eyes was a question, clear as words. "Do you see it too?" Elena gave the smallest nod. Just a fraction of movement. The child's shoulders dropped half an inch. Relief. The terrible, heartbreaking relief of not being alone and seeing the monster. Elena's shift ended in 2 hours. She had $847 in her checking account and a brother who needed $300 by Friday. She had a nursing degree that was 3 semesters from finished and a life held together with duct tape and determination. But she couldn't walk away from that little girl's eyes. Not again. Never again. 8:23 p.m. The dining room had reached that perfect chaos of a Tuesday night in full swing. Every table was full. The kitchen was slammed. Servers moved in coordinated patterns, weaving between tables with trays held high. The soft jazz couldn't quite cover the underlying hum of 200 conversations happening at once. Elena had maintained proximity to the Harrison table for the past 30 minutes. She'd refilled their breadbasket twice, checked water glasses 4 times, hovered close enough to intervene, but not close enough to be obvious. Her manager would have words with her later about table distribution, but she couldn't make herself leave. Jennifer, another server, grabbed her arm in passing. "Stop hovering on table 12. You're being weird. Roberto's going to notice." "I'm just making sure they have everything they need." "They're fine. You're making them uncomfortable. Move." Elena couldn't explain without sounding paranoid. "There's a man at the bar who might be dangerous," sounded insane when said out loud. She had no evidence, just instinct and a 7-year-old's terrified eyes. The man at the bar received a phone call. Elena watched him from across the room as he listened, said 3 words, hung up. Then he stood, more purposeful this time, his body language shifting from patient waiting to action. Romano's layout suddenly felt like a trap. The bar area was elevated 3 steps above the main dining room. The chef's table sat in the corner by the floor-to-ceiling windows. Beautiful view, tactical dead end. Security stood by the entrance, 40 feet away, currently distracted by an arriving party of 8 that included someone's Instagram-famous girlfriend, demanding a specific table. Marcus excused himself from the table. Restroom, 2 minutes, timing. That was what made Elena's instincts scream. The man at the bar getting a phone call, Marcus leaving, Alexander alone on his phone. It was too coordinated to be coincidence. Someone had planned this. Someone knew exactly when Sophie would be vulnerable. Alexander was absorbed in his own phone call now, voice low but intense. Something about the merger timeline, about patents, about things that meant nothing to Elena, but clearly meant everything to him. Sophie sat beside him, small hands folded in her lap, eyes tracking the approaching threat. The man moved through the dining room with purpose. His hands stayed inside his jacket, not reaching for a weapon yet, but ready. Other diners saw him as just another patron moving through the space. Elena saw the predator before the strike. She was carrying a tray of dirty dishes 20 feet away, moving toward the kitchen. The calculation happened in seconds. You have maybe 5 seconds. Security won't get there in time. Nobody else sees it, just you. You could walk away. You could pretend you didn't notice. You could protect the fragile life you've built. But she thought of Daniel's scar, thought of her mother's final breath, rattling and weak, the sound of someone leaving before they should, thought of promises kept and promises broken, and the weight of living with yourself after you chose wrong. Elena set down the tray. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. She grabbed the steak knife from table 9 as she passed, the kind Romanos bought expensive, 8 inches of sharp steel with a weighted handle. The couple at table 9 didn't notice. No one noticed. Until she started running. Not running exactly. Moving fast. Purpose in every step. A few diners looked up, confused. "Excuse me." She ignored them. Her body had switched into survival mode, the same mode that had gotten her through childhood, through raising Daniel, through every crisis that had forced her to choose between fight and flight. This time, she chose fight. The man reached the Harrison table 3 seconds before Elena did. His approach looked professional, briefcase in one hand, practiced smile, the posture of someone delivering expected information. "Mr. Harrison, there's been an incident with your car in the parking garage." Alexander looked up, confused. "What? Security sent me to get you immediately." That's when Elena saw it. The man's hand inside his jacket, fingers closing around something metal. The way his body angled between Alexander and the exit. The way his eyes flicked to Sophie with cold assessment. "Sir." Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. "The manager needs to speak with you immediately." She positioned herself between the man and Sophie. Her hand behind her back gripped the steak knife, hard enough that her knuckles went white. The man's eyes snapped to her, cold recognition, like he was recalculating a problem he'd thought was already solved. "Move." Not a request, an order. "I'm sorry, sir, but I need to..." His hand moved, fast, faster than Elena expected, faster than someone in an expensive suit should be able to move. Training, professional, deadly. The weapon cleared his jacket. Black metal, suppressor already attached. Professional grip that spoke of muscle memory and practice. This wasn't someone's first time. Elena's brain registered it all in the fragment of a second. This is real. You're going to die. This is how it ends. Bleeding out on marble floors because you couldn't mind your own business. But her body remembered something her brain had tried to forget, throwing herself between Daniel and danger. Standing between her mother and her boyfriend when his fists were flying. The way terror could make you move before thought, before logic, before the part of your brain that wanted to survive could tell you to run. Sophie screamed, "Daddy!" Alexander's chair crashed backward. His phone clattered to the floor. He was reaching for his daughter but too far away, always too far away when it mattered. The gun's trajectory swung toward Elena's chest, center mass, professional targeting. She had maybe half a second before. Elena lunged, not away, but toward. Every instinct said run, but she moved into the danger instead. The steak knife drove forward, amateur thrust, desperate, all the strength she had behind it. The blade caught his wrist, cut deep through expensive fabric and skin and tendon. His weapon discharged, the sound muffled by the suppressor, but unmistakable to anyone who'd ever heard a gunfire. A champagne glass shattered on the table behind her. Pain exploded in Elena's left shoulder, white-hot, then cold. Then nothing made sense. She was falling, watching the ceiling. The Edison bulbs she'd stared at for 6 years spun above her. Voices shouted, but they sounded underwater, distorted, coming from very far away. The marble was cold against her back. Warm blood pooled beneath her. Strange contrast, cold stone and hot blood. Her vision narrowed at the edges, darkness creeping in like a curtain slowly closing. Sophie's face appeared above hers. "The lady! Help the lady!" A child's voice, desperate and terrified and so small. Elena wanted to tell her it was okay, wanted to promise everything would be fine, but she couldn't make her mouth work. She'd done it. Sophie was safe. That had to be enough. Darkness came gentle, like mercy, like her mother's hand on her forehead when she was small and sick and afraid. Sounds came in fragments, screaming, chairs scraping against marble, footsteps running, the crash of something expensive shattering, all of it distorted like she was underwater. Elena lay on the floor, blood pooling warm beneath her left shoulder. It kept spreading. She could feel it soaking through her shirt, through her cheap polyester uniform, turning everything wet and sticky. The pain came in waves, each one worse than the last, stealing her breath and replacing it with fire. Sophie's small face hovered above hers, tears streaming down her cheeks. "The lady. Help the lady. Someone help her." Then Alexander was there, hand pressing hard against Elena's shoulder, applying pressure. His phone was at his ear, voice commanding despite the chaos. "Ambulance. Romano's on Michigan Avenue. Gunshot wound. Female, late 20s. Active bleeding." The pain made it hard to think, hard to remember why she was on the floor, hard to understand why a billionaire had his hand on her shoulder and was calling her brave. Marcus returned. Elena registered his arrival through her narrowing vision. The man who'd been standing, the one with the gun, was suddenly on the floor. Marcus moved with efficient violence, knee on the attacker's spine, weapon secured, calling for security in the same calm voice someone might use to order coffee. Security finally arrived. Too late, always too late when it mattered. Elena's vision tunneled. The edges went dark first, creeping inward like someone was turning down the lights. She tried to speak. "Sophie, is she..." Alexander's face came into focus. "She's safe. You saved her. Stay with me. Ambulance is coming. 2 minutes. You're going to be fine." Fine. The word felt like a lie, but she didn't have the strength to argue. Her mother's promise echoed up from memory. "Finish what you start, no matter how long it takes." Elena had spent 9 years finishing what her mother started, raising Daniel, keeping him safe, making sure he had chances she never did. And now, what? Who would finish that promise now? Daniel. Someone needed to call Daniel, tell him where she was, tell him what? That his sister was bleeding out on a restaurant floor because she couldn't walk past the scared child. Her scholarship, her rent, her carefully constructed life built from double shifts and swallowed pride, all of it falling away with her consciousness. Sophie's small hand gripped Elena's. "Don't leave. Please don't leave." Elena wanted to promise, wanted to tell this little girl that everything would be okay, but she'd learned young that promises were dangerous, that people left even when they swore they'd stay. Sirens approached, blue and red lights reflecting off marble and Edison bulbs in expensive wine glasses. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. She wasn't sure what she was apologizing for bleeding, for making a scene, for being the kind of person who couldn't just look away. The darkness came anyway, gentle, complete, like mercy she didn't deserve, but desperately needed. Elena woke to fluorescent lights burning into her eyes. The smell hit her next, antiseptic sharp enough to taste, mixing with something metallic that she dimly recognized as her own blood. Beeping monitors surrounded her bed, rhythmic and relentless, counting out seconds she'd lost somewhere between the restaurant floor and now. Her left shoulder throbbed with a deep, bone-level ache that morphine couldn't quite touch. The drugs made her thoughts swim, slippery and hard to hold. She tried to lift her head and immediately regretted it. The clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m. 3 hours. She'd lost 3 hours. A nurse appeared, middle-aged, tired eyes that had seen too many gunshot wounds to be impressed by one more. "You're awake. That's good. Bullet went through shoulder, missed bone and major vessels. You're very lucky." Lucky. The word felt wrong in Elena's mouth, tasted like copper and lies. Before she could respond, a man in a cheap suit materialized beside her bed. Detective badge clipped to his belt, notebook already open, pen ready. His expression was neutral in a way that felt deliberately hostile. "Ms. Torres, I need to ask you some questions while the incident is fresh. Walk me through what happened. Why did you approach Mr. Harrison's table with a knife?" The phrasing made her stomach drop. Not, "Why did you intervene?" Not, "What made you suspicious?" Why did you approach with a knife? Like she'd been the aggressor, like she'd started this. Elena's words came out slurred, fighting through the morphine fog. "Saw the man. At the bar. Sophie was scared. He had a gun." "Security footage shows you grabbing a knife from another table and approaching the Harrison party. The assailant, Mr. Sokolov, claims you attacked him first, that he was defending himself when his weapon discharged." "What? No, he was going to—" "We'll need you to come to the station for a formal statement once you're discharged. Don't leave Chicago." He left before she could process what he'd said, before she could explain that cold-eyed men don't carry suppressed weapons to restaurants unless they're planning to use them, before she could make him understand that she'd saved a child, not attacked a patron. An insurance coordinator arrived next, clipboard in hand, wearing the exhausted politeness of someone who delivered bad news for a living. Elena's restaurant-provided insurance covered the ER visit, barely, but nothing else. Physical therapy was recommended, $200 per session, minimum 12 sessions needed for full recovery. $2,400 she didn't have, for an injury she'd gotten saving someone else's child. "We'll discharge you in an hour. Someone coming to pick you up?" Daniel couldn't drive yet. Elena's car was still parked at Romano's, wherever they'd towed it. It was midnight in a city that felt suddenly hostile. "I can take an Uber." Discharge papers came in a stack. Follow-up appointments she couldn't afford, pain management instructions, warning signs of infection to watch for. They sent her out the service exit at 1:30 a.m., shoulder screaming, wearing hospital scrubs because her uniform was evidence in a case that apparently made her the suspect. The night air hit her face like a slap. Chicago had never felt colder. Elena's apartment door stuck like it always did. She had to shoulder it open, her good shoulder, while Daniel held her steady. 2:15 a.m. He'd been asleep when Marcus called him, terrified when he'd arrived at the hospital to find his sister bandaged and glazed with pain medication. "I'm fine," she lied. "Go back to sleep." He didn't. She could hear him pacing in the other room, could feel his fear like a physical presence. But pain made sleep impossible anyway. She lay on her second-hand couch, staring at the water-stained ceiling, watching headlights from the street paint moving shadows across the walls. At 6:30 a.m., her phone started ringing. Unknown number. Ms. Torres, this is Cristina Valdez from Channel 7 News. We'd like to interview you about last night's heroic incident. Heroic. The word felt obscene. Elena hung up. The calls kept coming. Different stations. A podcast producer. Someone claiming to be a literary agent who wanted to discuss book rights. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing, wouldn't let her think, wouldn't give her space to process that she'd been shot less than 12 hours ago. At 9 a.m., an email arrived from Romano's general manager. Due to last night's incident and the pending police investigation, your employment has been suspended without pay effective immediately. We'll be in touch regarding next steps. Elena read it 3 times through tears and morphine. The words blurred together, but the meaning stayed sharp. 6 years. 6 years of double shifts and swallowed pride and serving people who didn't see her as human. Gone in one email sent before breakfast. At 10:30 a.m., her nursing program sent their own message. We've been made aware of your involvement in a violent incident. Pending the police investigation's outcome, your scholarship status is under review. The scholarship that took 3 years to earn. The promise to her mother that she was so close to keeping. Under review because she'd saved a child's life. Daniel woke up and turned on the TV. His face went pale. Elena. Holy shit, that's you! The security footage played on every channel. Grainy, but clear enough. Elena grabbing a knife. Elena moving fast toward the Harrison table. Elena lunging at a man in an expensive suit. The angle didn't show his weapon. Didn't show Sophie's terror. Didn't show anything except a waitress attacking a customer. The news anchor's voice dripped with false balance. Waitress turned hero or unhinged employee. Opinions are divided. The screen split, one side showing her, the other showing talking heads debating her mental state like she wasn't a person, like she was just content to fill airtime. Romano's released an official statement. We're cooperating fully with authorities. Ms. Torres's actions, while well-intentioned, violated company protocol and endangered other guests. Protecting their reputation, protecting their liability, protecting everything except the woman who'd bled on their marble floors. They're making you sound crazy, Daniel's voice cracked. You saved that kid. Elena couldn't explain that saving people doesn't pay rent, that heroism looks different when you're working class, that the systems designed to protect you will throw you away the moment you become inconvenient. At 2 p.m., her landlord knocked, angry about news trucks blocking the street, other tenants complaining about the attention, about the police presence, about having to see Elena's face on the news when they walked past her door. I'm sorry, but with the media attention and ongoing investigation, I need you to vacate within 30 days. I'll return your security deposit. 30 days. To find housing in a neighborhood where rent increased monthly, with no job, with a criminal investigation, with a shoulder that couldn't lift anything heavier than a coffee cup. Elena sat on her couch, shoulder throbbing despite the pills, and watched her life disintegrate in real time. Every cynical instinct she'd ever developed was being validated. Working class hero was just another way of saying working class victim with better PR. At 11 p.m., 23 hours after the bullet tore through her shoulder, someone knocked on Elena's door. She considered ignoring it. Probably another reporter wanting a quote, wanting her to perform gratitude or trauma or whatever emotion would get the most clicks. Daniel was finally asleep again, exhausted from the stress of watching his sister's life collapse in 12-hour increments. The knock came again, insistent but not aggressive. Elena opened the door. Marcus stood there, Alexander's assistant, the one who'd moved like trained security when violence erupted. He wore a different suit, but the same sharp eyes, though something had softened in his expression. He held a formal envelope that looked ominous in the dim hallway light. Ms. Torres, may I come in? It's late. I know. This can't wait. He entered without waiting for permission, controlled but urgent, like a man on a timeline Elena didn't understand. He handed her the envelope. She opened it with her good hand, fumbling with the flap. Inside, copies of Romano's trespassing complaint, her landlord's eviction notice, the university scholarship review letter, documents that had arrived throughout the day, each one another nail in the coffin of her ordinary life. "How did you... Mr. Harrison has been busy today." Marcus's voice was calm, but his eyes tracked every shadow in her apartment. "May I be direct?" Elena nodded. She was too exhausted for games, too medicated for subtlety, too broken to care about politeness. "The people who ordered Sophie's kidnapping know your face now. They're tying up loose ends. You're not safe here." The words took seconds to penetrate the fog. When they did, her breath caught. "What?" "Come with me, please." "I don't understand." "You will. But we need to leave now. Pack essentials for yourself and your brother. 5 minutes." Elena's brain stuttered. This was insane. Getting in a car with a billionaire's assistant because her life had fallen apart. What happened to staying in your lane? What happened to invisible being safe? But what lane was left? They'd taken her job, her home, her scholarship. They'd turned her into a suspect for saving a child. Would you trust a billionaire's assistant in this moment? She wanted to ask someone, anyone, but there was no one to ask except herself, and herself was too tired to argue. 5 minutes, Marcus repeated. Elena woke up Daniel, started packing, and wondered what the hell she was doing. Let me know in the comments what you'd do in Elena's situation. And don't forget to subscribe, because the choice she's about to make changes absolutely everything. The SUV smelled like leather and money, the kind of clean that comes from being detailed every week, not the air freshener over old French fries smell Elena's Honda carried. Black exterior, tinted windows dark enough to hide bodies, interior worth more than 3 months of her former salary. Daniel had insisted on coming. I'm not letting you go alone. 17 years old and trying to be the man their mother had needed him to become. It broke Elena's heart. Marcus drove in silence through Chicago's late-night streets. Elena's internal monologue ran on a desperate loop. This is insane. You're getting in a car with a stranger because your life fell apart in one day. What happened to staying safe? What happened to being invisible? But what lane was left when they'd taken everything? They drove through downtown first, past Millennium Park, where tourists had taken photos that afternoon, oblivious to violence happening blocks away. Past Willis Tower rising against the night sky, like a monument to everything Elena would never have. The city looked beautiful from inside expensive leather seats. It always did when you weren't walking through it. North on Lakeshore Drive. The city lights began giving way to suburban darkness, that particular kind of black that comes from space between buildings, from neighborhoods where property values make density unnecessary. Wealth getting louder in its silence. That's what her mother used to say about places like this. They passed through Wilmette, then Kenilworth. The houses here didn't advertise. They hid behind gates and hedges and the kind of privacy money could buy. Driveways disappeared into darkness. Security systems blinked red in the night. Where are we going? Elena finally asked. Somewhere safe, Marcus said, nothing more. Daniel pressed his face to the window like a kid despite being 17. Elena, these houses are insane. Look at that one. It's got like 3 garages. 4, actually. Elena counted, for people who probably owned 6 cars. 90 minutes after leaving Pilsen, the SUV stopped at an iron gate. A security guard emerged from a small booth, professional, armed, nodding recognition at Marcus before the gate slid open with the kind of silent hydraulics that spoke of serious money. The estate beyond took Elena's breath. A quarter-mile driveway lined with mature oak trees, branches forming a canopy overhead. The main house glowed in the distance. Tudor revival architecture, all stone and timber, East Wing and West Wing, like something from a period drama. At least 20,000 square feet. Maybe more. Not a house, a compound. Marcus drove past the main house to a separate structure set back among more trees. Guest house, he said simply. The guest house was larger than any home Elena had ever entered, larger than the entire apartment building where she'd just been evicted. Elena's throat went tight. This wasn't rescue. This was a different world entirely. The guest house interior looked like it belonged in a magazine Elena couldn't afford. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, modern furnishings in tasteful grays and creams, a kitchen with marble countertops that probably cost more than Elena made in a year. 3 bedrooms visible down a hallway that stretched into shadows. Alexander Harrison waited in the living room, still wearing the same clothes from Romano's, rumpled now, exhausted. Exhaustion carved into his face made him look older than 38. Human. Sophie slept on the couch beside him, small hand clutching his arm even in sleep, like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. He stood when they entered. Elena, thank you for coming. Using her first name felt too intimate. They didn't know each other. She'd served his table once and taken a bullet for his daughter. That wasn't the same as friendship. I don't understand what's happening. Sit, please. His voice carried command even when he was trying to sound gentle. I owe you an explanation. Daniel stayed close to Elena, protective despite being younger and smaller. She sank onto a chair that probably cost more than her security deposit. Her shoulders screamed in protest. Alexander sat across from her, choosing words carefully. 8 months ago, my wife died in a car accident. The pause felt heavy. Elena waited. Except it wasn't an accident. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to unsee once spoken. Harrison Technologies is finalizing a merger involving medical AI patents worth billions, revolutionary diagnostics, treatment protocols that could save millions of lives. Our proprietary data is protected by biometric security that only I can access. He rubbed his face, and Elena saw the wedding ring still on his left hand. There are competitors, foreign entities, corporate rivals, who would do anything to steal that technology. Elena's brain struggled to connect dots through pain medication and exhaustion, medical AI, billions, murder. The car accident was the first attempt. They thought if Catherine died, I'd be vulnerable, grief-stricken, easy to manipulate or blackmail. His voice cracked slightly. When that didn't work, when I tightened security instead of loosening it, they changed strategies. Sophie stirred in her sleep. Alexander's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Sophie became the target. Kidnap her, force me to give them access. Or kill her to break me completely. Elena's stomach turned. The man tonight, Viktor Sokolov, professional contractor, former Russian military. He's in custody, but he's not talking. The people who hired him are still out there. Why are you telling me this? Elena's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her thighs to make them stop. Because you're in danger now. The room felt smaller suddenly, colder. They know you saw Victor give a signal to someone at the bar right before he approached. In the chaos, you probably didn't register it consciously, but they can't take that risk. You're a witness who can identify the person who coordinated the attack. Elena searched her memory. The man at the bar, cold eyes, his hand adjusting his watch right before standing. Had that been a signal? She'd thought he was just checking the time. We've spent today tracking threats against you, Marcus added quietly. Someone tried to access your apartment building twice, once claiming to be from building maintenance, once as a delivery driver. Another person called your brother's school asking about his schedule, claiming to be from the robotics competition. What the fuck? Daniel's voice cracked. Elena's breath came faster. So what? I'm supposed to hide? For how long? You're supposed to let me protect you the way you protected Sophie. Alexander leaned forward. Until we identify everyone involved, until the FBI arrests the people who ordered this, until it's safe. I can't. You don't have another option. Not anymore. They've already started. Sophie woke during the conversation. Elena didn't notice at first. The child moved so quietly, like she'd learned early that silence was survival. But then Sophie was standing, walking carefully across the expensive rug toward Elena. Elena knew from the reservation details, from Marcus's earlier explanation, Sophie hadn't spoken more than basic words since her mother's death 8 months ago. Selective mutism, the therapists called it, trauma response. The child's voice had disappeared with her mother. Sophie climbed onto the couch beside Elena, mindful of her bandaged shoulder, moving with the careful awareness of someone who'd learned that bodies were fragile. She looked up with dark eyes that held too much awareness for 7 years old, eyes that had watched her mother die, eyes that had watched a stranger bleed. Then she spoke, voice small but clear, cutting through every adult conversation like a blade. You stayed. Alexander froze. Tears formed instantly, spilling over before he could stop them. Mommy left, but you stayed. Elena's throat closed. She couldn't breathe around the weight of those words. Sophie, honey. Alexander's voice broke. Mommy didn't choose to leave. I know. Sophie's logic was brutal in its purity. But she's gone. Elena stayed. The child leaned against Elena's good side, small body warm and trusting. You're safe now. And Elena realized with a shock that cut deeper than the bullet. The child was comforting her. This 7-year-old who'd watched her mother die, who'd watched a gun pointed at a stranger, who'd watched that stranger collapse bleeding onto marble. This child was offering safety to the adult who was supposed to protect her. Until we identify everyone involved in the plot. You're not safe elsewhere, Alexander continued, voice thick with emotion. He wasn't bothering to hide anymore. The guest house is yours. Medical care, legal support, security, whatever you need. This isn't charity. It's a debt I'll never fully repay, but I'm going to try. Elena looked around. Crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than her car, furniture that belonged in museums, a view of grounds she could barely process through exhaustion and morphine and the crushing weight of everything that had happened in 24 hours. She looked at Daniel, eyes wide, processing an impossible situation that had no good answers, only different kinds of dangerous. She looked at Sophie, small hand gripping her arm with desperate trust, like Elena was a life raft in dark water. I don't know how to accept this, Elena whispered. Start by staying alive, Alexander said. The rest we'll figure out. Sophie's hand tightened. You stayed before. Stay again. And Elena, who'd spent her whole life being invisible, being careful, being someone who didn't take up space, Elena, who had nothing left to lose because they'd already taken everything, made a choice. Okay, she said, I'll stay. Honestly, I wouldn't know how to react in Elena's situation either. Drop a comment. Would you accept help from a billionaire, or would pride make you walk away? And hit that subscribe button because Sophie's first words are just the beginning of this transformation. Trust me, what happens next will break your heart in the best way possible. 3 days into staying at the guest house, Elena still woke up confused. The silk sheets felt wrong. The silence felt wrong. Everything about this life felt like borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit. Physical therapy started that morning. A private therapist arrived at the estate, professional, efficient, carrying equipment that probably cost more than Elena's entire ER visit. They worked in the mansion's gym, a space larger than her former apartment, with floor-to-ceiling mirrors that forced her to watch herself struggle through rotator cuff exercises. Daniel had been enrolled in the local school temporarily. Security drove him every morning in the black SUV, the same one that had brought them here. Her brother was adjusting faster than she was, already making friends, already talking about the robotics lab like it was normal to have access to equipment most universities couldn't afford. Alexander worked from home more now. Sophie wouldn't let him far from sight, trailing him through the house like a shadow, sleeping in his room when nightmares came. The child was speaking more, still quiet, still careful, but her voice was returning piece by piece. The morning meeting happened in Alexander's study. Elena, Alexander, Marcus, and FBI agent Sarah Chen, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the kind of tired that came from seeing too much darkness in human nature. "We've been reviewing security footage from Romano's," Agent Chen began, pulling up video on Alexander's laptop. The bar area camera malfunctioned specifically during the incident window. 37 minutes of static, then perfect functionality resumed. "That's not coincidence," Marcus said quietly. "No. Someone with access to Romano's security system disabled it." Agent Chen's fingers moved across the keyboard, which led us to investigate who had that access. Marcus pulled up Harrison Technologies' organization chart on the screen. Names and positions, lines connecting departments, a web of employees and executives Elena had never thought about before. "We've been conducting an internal investigation," Marcus continued. "Yesterday we found irregular communications, financial records showing wire transfers to offshore accounts." Alexander leaned forward, face pale. "Who?" "Richard Pemberton, your CFO." The name hung in the air like poison. Elena watched Alexander's face crack open. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, like ice breaking under weight. "Richard Pemberton." His voice came out hollow. "I've known him 12 years. He was at our wedding. He's Sophie's godfather." Agent Chen's expression didn't change. "The wire transfers coincide with your wife's accident and last week's incident. 3 payments of $500,000 each. The first 2 weeks before Catherine's car crash. The second the day after she died. The third, 48 hours before the restaurant attack. Someone inside, someone trusted, someone who'd held Sophie as a baby and attended Catherine's funeral and looked Alexander in the eye while orchestrating murder. Motive?" Alexander's voice barely worked. "A Chinese tech conglomerate offered him $500 million for your medical AI patents. Without your biometric access, the technology is worthless. They needed leverage." "Plan A," Marcus said, voice tight with controlled rage, "was leveraging a grief-stricken widower through his wife's accident. Make you vulnerable, make you desperate, make you willing to trade anything for what? Money? Purpose? Distraction. When that didn't work, when you tightened security instead of loosening it, they changed strategies." Agent Chen finished. "Plan B was kidnapping Sophie, force you to give them access, or lose your daughter too." Elena's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs. "I'm not in danger because I'm a hero. I'm in danger because I saw Pemberton." Agent Chen turned to her, nodding. "You were the only person at Romano's that night, photographed looking directly at him before the attack. We found images on Viktor Sokolov's phone, surveillance photos he'd taken. Most show Alexander and Sophie, but 3 show you, circled in red. Your waitress position gave you sightlines others didn't have. You saw him signal Sokolov." Elena remembered now. The man at the bar adjusting his watch, looking toward someone else. She'd thought he was just checking the time. She'd been wrong. "Where is he?" Alexander stood, pacing like a trapped animal. "Where's Pemberton?" "He cleared his schedule after the incident, told his assistant he was taking personal time, disappeared." Marcus's jaw was tight. "Interpol is tracking him. We flagged his passport, his credit cards, everything." "How many people?" Alexander's voice rose. "How deep does this go? Who else? Who else did I trust who wanted my daughter dead?" "We're investigating everyone with access to your schedule, your home, your company." Agent Chen's voice stayed level. This kind of conspiracy requires multiple points of coordination. Trust transformed into a weapon, every handshake suspect, every smile potentially masking murder. Sophie appeared in the doorway, small, quiet, watching them with eyes too old for 7. She didn't understand the details, but she felt the danger. Children always did. Elena stood and walked to her, ignoring the protest from her healing shoulder. Sophie's small hand slipped into hers. "We're going to make sure you're safe," Elena whispered. "All of you. Even if the cost was testifying against people with the resources to make witnesses disappear." A week after the incident, Elena's face was everywhere. Waitress hero trended on Twitter for 3 days straight. The story went national, then international. Everyone had an opinion about the woman who'd taken a bullet for a billionaire's daughter. The narrative split along predictable lines. Conservative outlets framed her as working-class hero versus corrupt elite. Liberal outlets focused on woman forced to risk life because no social safety net. Tech news covered it as potential corporate espionage, questioning whether Harrison Technologies' security failures indicated larger vulnerabilities. Romanos doubled down on their position. Their official statement remained unchanged. Ms. Torres violated company protocol and endangered other guests, protecting liability over people, just like Elena had always suspected they would. But other servers started coming forward, anonymous interviews about management prioritizing wealthy patrons' comfort over safety. Stories about being told not to question suspicious behavior, about security cameras that malfunctioned conveniently when incidents occurred. Then Dr. Margaret Hart, the trauma surgeon from Elena's ER visit, went on record with the Chicago Tribune. "I treated her wound. That woman threw herself in front of a bullet for a stranger's child. The hospital's treatment of her afterward was disgraceful. We bill patients tens of thousands for trauma care, then discharge them without adequate follow-up support." Public opinion began shifting. A GoFundMe appeared without Elena's knowledge, created by someone named Sarah M. from Pilsen. It raised $180,000 in 48 hours. Elena watched from the guest house, scrolling through comments on her phone, feeling increasingly disconnected from the person they were describing. "I don't want their money. I want my life back." Daniel sat beside her, 17, and somehow wiser than she felt. "Your old life is gone, Elena. Maybe that's not the worst thing." "How can you say that?" "Because your old life was killing you. Working 3 jobs, never sleeping, always one emergency away from homelessness." He gestured around the guest house. "This is weird, yeah, but you're alive, you're healing. I'm in a school with an actual robotics lab. Maybe we stop fighting good things when they happen." Alexander appeared in the doorway. "Let me arrange a press conference. Tell your story on your terms." Elena's stomach dropped. "I'm not good with attention." "You don't have to be good at it." His voice was gentle. "You just have to be honest." And Elena, who'd spent her life invisible, realized she didn't have that option anymore. The Chicago Athletic Association hotel conference room felt too small and too large at the same time. Cameras lined the back wall, reporters packed the seats, notebooks ready, phones recording. Elena sat at a table facing them all, wearing borrowed professional clothes that fit her body but not her life. Alexander sat beside her, protective but deliberately letting her have center position. Marcus stood by the door, scanning faces like threats might materialize from the press corps itself. Elena's statement had been written and rewritten. Her hands shook, holding the paper. "I'm not a hero." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm a waitress who saw a scared child and couldn't look away. I did what anyone should do." Questions came immediately, overlapping, aggressive. "Are you suing Romanos? Are you romantically involved with Mr. Harrison? Did you know about the conspiracy before the attack?" Elena's jaw tightened at the romantic question. "A week ago, he didn't know I existed. I served his table. That's how our world works. People like me are invisible until we're bleeding. The quote would be viral within an hour. She didn't know that yet. A reporter from the Tribune raised her hand. What do you want people to know about what happened? Elena paused, thought of her mother dying in a hospital that discharged her too early because her insurance had run out. Thought of Daniel at 9 with a scar on his forehead because no one had noticed the danger. Thought of Sophie's small hand gripping hers, desperate for someone to stay. I want people to know that heroism doesn't pay rent. The words came easier now. That the systems that should protect us often punish us instead. That I'd do it again, save Sophie. But I shouldn't have to lose everything to be a decent human being. Silence. Then applause, unusual from a press corps, genuine in a way that made Elena's throat tight. Alexander leaned toward the microphone. Elena Torres acted when everyone else failed, when trained security failed, when systems failed. I'm ensuring she has resources to rebuild her life. That's the minimum. Anyone with information about the conspiracy should contact the FBI immediately. Elena had been invisible her whole life. Now she was testimony, evidence, the witness who could make the case against people with billions of reasons to silence her. She wasn't sure which was more dangerous. 2 weeks into staying at the estate, the guest house had started feeling less like temporary shelter and more like something Elena didn't have words for yet. Not home. That word still belonged to the studio apartment in Pilsen she'd never see again. But something. Sophie was in therapy 3 times a week, speaking more. Nightmares decreasing from every night to twice a week to once. She'd bonded to Elena in ways that terrified and humbled her, following her through the house, helping with small tasks, asking questions about everything. Elena's physical therapy was progressing. Her shoulder's range of motion improved daily, though the scar would be permanent. A reminder carved into her body that she'd chosen to stay when leaving would have been safer. Daniel was thriving. The new school's robotics team had recruited him immediately, and he talked constantly about competitions and engineering programs and futures that suddenly seemed possible. Late November morning, Agent Chen arrived unannounced, Marcus escorting her to Alexander's study where Elena had been reviewing testimony notes. We found Pemberton. Agent Chen's voice was calm, but her eyes were bright. Montreal, trying to board a flight to Beijing using a fake passport. She pulled up footage on her tablet, airport security cameras showing Richard Pemberton in handcuffs. Expensive suit rumpled now, expensive watch visible as officers secured his wrists. He looked smaller than Elena had imagined, less powerful, just a man who'd killed for money and failed. Alexander watched the footage, face unreadable. Then tears came, silent, devastating. He killed Catherine. He planned to take Sophie. 12 years of trust. And his voice broke. Marcus's hand landed on his shoulder, steady and solid. We unlocked his phone, Agent Chen continued. Messages with Viktor Sokolov, with Chinese tech executives. Detailed plans for both assassination attempts. Timeline, logistics, payment schedules. It's all there. But more names emerged as they scrolled through communications. 2 other Harrison Technologies executives, people Alexander had hired, promoted, trusted. Romano's security manager who'd disabled the cameras. Even a Chicago PD detective who'd been feeding Pemberton information about the investigation. The conspiracy was larger than anyone had anticipated. Deeper. More people willing to murder a child for their cut of $500 million. Federal indictments are rolling out now, Agent Chen said. Racketeering, murder, attempted kidnapping. Viktor Sokolov is cooperating for a reduced sentence. His testimony will ensure everyone goes to prison for life. She turned to Elena. We'll need you to testify about what you saw at the bar, the signal. Your testimony corroborates the phone records. You're the witness who makes the case ironclad. Weight of responsibility Elena had never asked for, but Sophie deserved justice for her mother. They all did. I'll testify, Elena said. Whatever you need. Physical therapy happened in the mansion's gym now, a space with equipment Elena had only seen in professional athletic facilities. She worked through shoulder exercises while Sophie colored at a small table nearby, the child's constant presence somehow making the pain more bearable. Dr. Ramirez, Sophie's child psychologist, sat in the corner, monitoring, taking notes on her tablet. Watching the bond between them develop in ways traditional therapy couldn't manufacture. Elena grimaced through a rotator cuff rotation. The resistance band pulled against healing tissue, pain sharp enough to steal her breath. Sophie looked up from her coloring. Does it hurt? A little, but it's getting better. Because you're strong. Elena smiled despite the ache. I'm really not. I'm just stubborn. Sophie set down her crayon and crossed the gym. She picked up the other end of the resistance band, helping Elena complete the rotation. 7 years old and already understanding that healing required support. Mommy was strong too. Sophie's voice was soft but clear. She played tennis and could carry me even when I got big. Elena's hands stilled. This was the first time Sophie had voluntarily shared a memory of her mother, not prompted by therapy, not forced by questions, just offered freely. Dr. Ramirez's pen moved across her tablet, but she stayed silent. Your mommy sounds amazing, Elena said carefully. She was. Sophie's eyes were thoughtful. I was sad when she died. I'm still sad sometimes. That's okay. Being sad means you loved her. Sophie considered this with the seriousness children bring to important truths. I love you too. Different, but real. Elena's breath caught, her shoulder forgotten. Everything forgotten except this child's words. Sophie continued, working through logic only a 7-year-old could articulate so perfectly. Mommy's love is in my memory. Your love is happening now. I can have both. 7-year-old wisdom that destroyed adults. Dr. Ramirez was openly wiping tears. Elena knelt to Sophie's level, ignoring the protest from her shoulder. I love you too, sweetheart. So much. Sophie hugged her carefully, mindful of the healing wound. You stayed. That matters most. That phrase again, you stayed, the highest compliment a child who'd lost her mother could give. Alexander appeared in the doorway, had been there long enough to witness everything, tears streaming down his face unchecked. Sophie, baby, do you understand what you just did? I talked about mommy without being too sad. You did. I'm so proud of you. Later, Dr. Ramirez explained to Elena and Alexander, Sophie's presence is therapeutic in ways medication and therapy alone couldn't achieve. Elena's commitment isn't conditional. Sophie has witnessed that through the attack, through the recovery, through everything. She feels safe enough to process her trauma because she knows Elena won't leave. Alexander turned to Elena, voice thick. You're not just her protector. You're her family now. Family. Elena, who'd had only Daniel for 9 years. Family expanding in the strangest, most unexpected way. Thanksgiving arrived before Elena was ready. Sophie insisted they celebrate properly, which meant Elena found herself in the mansion's enormous kitchen, insisting right back that she'd do the cooking. I'm not a guest anymore, and I'm not helpless, Daniel helped, making jokes about the kitchen's size. Our apartment could fit in here 3 times, 4 if we got creative with the bathroom. Sophie set the table with intense concentration, precise placement of silverware, tongue between her teeth, determined to get everything perfect. She'd asked to use her mother's china, the first time Alexander had seen those plates since Catherine's death. Marcus joined them, rare personal moment, his protective shell cracking enough to reveal the human underneath. He brought wine and told stories about Alexander's early business days that made Sophie giggle. Alexander carved the turkey with domestic awkwardness that was somehow endearing, a scene impossible to imagine 4 weeks ago. Prayer before the meal felt strange. Elena hadn't prayed since her mother died, but Sophie insisted, and Alexander looked too overwhelmed to argue. "I'm thankful for Elena," Sophie said, small hands folded, "and for Daniel, and for Marcus, who keeps us safe, and for Daddy, who doesn't work as much now, and for Mommy in heaven." Daniel cleared his throat. "I'm thankful Elena didn't die. That would have sucked." Teenage eloquence making everyone laugh, breaking the tension. "I'm thankful for second chances," Elena said quietly, "and for people who see you when you're invisible." The meal was chaotic. Sophie spilled cranberry sauce. Daniel told embarrassing childhood stories about Elena. Marcus revealed a dry sense of humor that had been hiding behind his security professional demeanor. It felt like family. Strange, assembled from trauma and chance, but family nonetheless. After Sophie went to bed, the adults gathered on the guest house porch. November cold bit through their blankets, but no one moved to go inside. "I've been thinking about what comes next," Alexander said carefully. Elena tensed. "Are we leaving?" "What? No, opposite." He turned to face her. "I'm thinking about what staying looks like long-term." He'd hired lawyers to expedite guardianship papers, making Elena's role in Sophie's life official, legal, permanent. "Sophie needs you, not as an employee or protector, as family." "I'm not her mother." "No, but you're someone who chose her when you didn't have to. That counts for more." January 2025. The federal courthouse in downtown Chicago stood like a monument to justice. All marble columns and security checkpoints, metal detectors and armed guards. The kind of building designed to remind you that power lived here, that consequences were real. Pemberton's trial had drawn massive media coverage. News trucks lined the street outside. The public gallery was packed. Journalists, curious citizens, people who'd followed Elena's story and wanted to see how it ended. Catherine Harrison's parents sat in the front row, faces carved with grief that time hadn't softened. Elena sat in the witness box, wearing a professional suit Alexander had bought her. Navy blue, perfectly tailored, nothing like the clothes she'd worn serving tables. Sophie's good luck bracelet circled her wrist, cheap plastic beads the child had made in art therapy, worth more than everything else she was wearing combined. The prosecutor approached, a woman in her 50s with the kind of calm that came from trying hundreds of cases. "Ms. Torres, please tell the jury what you observed at Romano's Italian Bistro on the evening of October 29th, 2024. Elena's testimony came clear and detailed. No embellishment, just what she'd seen. Sophie's fear, the man at the bar, his hand adjusting his watch in signal, the approach, the weapon. Her voice stayed steady, describing the moment the bullet tore through her shoulder, the way Sophie had screamed, the blood on white tablecloth. The defense attorney stood, expensive suit, practiced skepticism. He approached like a predator, testing for weakness. "Ms. Torres, you admit you have no security training?" "Yes." "No law enforcement background?" "I'm a waitress." She didn't say was. The distinction mattered. "Yet, you took it upon yourself to grab a knife and intervene in what you perceived as a threat." "I saw a child in danger." Or, his voice took on an edge, did you see an opportunity for attention, for financial gain, for access to a billionaire's resources? The courtroom went silent. Elena felt every eye on her, felt the weight of the question designed to make her look opportunistic, greedy, calculating. Her response came calm, devastating in its simplicity. "I saw a scared little girl, that's all. If you can't understand why that matters, I feel sorry for you." The gallery murmured approval. The judge banged his gavel, but damage was done, to the defense, not to Elena. The prosecution showed security footage next. Elena's body language, the protective positioning, the desperate lunge with an amateur's grip on a steak knife. The attack happened in seconds, brutal, chaotic, undeniable. Viktor Sokolov testified from prison. Professional hitman turned cooperating witness, describing how Pemberton had hired him, ordered Catherine Harrison's assassination, planned Sophie's kidnapping with clinical precision. Phone records corroborated everything: timestamps, payments, coordination. Pemberton sat emotionless at the defense table, face blank, eyes calculating even now, like he was still running equations about how to escape consequences for murder. The jury deliberated 8 hours, returned with a verdict that surprised no one who'd watched the evidence unfold: guilty on all counts: murder, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, racketeering, industrial espionage. Sentencing would come weeks later, but the outcome was clear: life without possibility of parole. Alexander sat in the courtroom holding Sophie, both crying tears of relief. Catherine's parents approached Elena afterward, elderly, broken, but grateful in ways that transcended words. "You gave us justice for our daughter," Catherine's mother said, gripping Elena's hands. "You saved our granddaughter. We'll never forget what you did." Elena's throat closed. She nodded because speaking was impossible. Justice felt heavier than she'd expected, more final, less satisfying than the movies made it look. But Sophie was safe. That was enough. Late spring 2025. The estate gardens bloomed with roses and peonies, tulips and irises. Colors Elena had names for now after months of Sophie teaching her about flowers. The guest house had become home in ways Elena had stopped fighting. Her shoulder had healed fully. Range of motion restored. Strength returned. Only a faint scar remained. Puckered tissue she traced sometimes, remembering the moment she'd chosen to stay instead of run. Nursing school continued online. Elena had completed the spring semester with top grades, surprising exactly no one except herself. 2 semesters remained before graduation. The promise to her mother, "Finish what you start," was within reach now. Daniel was a high school senior, college acceptance letters arriving weekly. MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon. Schools that had been fantasies a year ago were now genuine options. Full scholarships offered because her brother was brilliant and finally had the space to prove it. Sophie thrived, speaking openly now, telling stories, asking questions, being the 7-year-old, now 8-year-old, she deserved to be. Nightmares still came, but less frequently. Once a week instead of every night. Progress measured in peaceful sleep. Alexander had returned to work, but his boundaries looked different. Home by 6 o'clock. Weekends sacred, protected from calls and emails and the demands of running a billion-dollar company. Sophie had taught him what mattered. So had Catherine's death. So had Elena. Elena's routine had settled into something sustainable. Morning physical fitness with Sophie, online classes during school hours, evenings with family. The word family no longer felt strange in her mouth. It fit now, worn comfortable through use. Media requests still arrived regularly. Book deals, movie rights, interview requests from podcasts and morning shows, and documentaries about corporate crime. Elena declined most of them. "I'm not a story, I'm a person." But she agreed to one, a local Chicago news feature on working-class heroes, profiles of people who'd acted when action cost them everything. The journalist asked what everyone asked. "Do you regret what happened?" Elena considered the question seriously, thinking about her studio apartment, her restaurant job, the life she'd built and lost in one evening. "I regret the system that made heroism cost so much, but I don't regret saving Sophie. I'd lose everything again for her." Alexander watched the interview later, sitting beside her on the guest house couch. "You didn't lose everything. You gained us. Weirdest trade ever." He laughed, and it was genuine. Not the controlled corporate laugh, but real humor. "Catherine would have liked you." First time he'd spoken about his late wife without pain shadowing every word. Progress for him, too. "She would have approved of how you protect Sophie, how you see her as a person, not a project or a responsibility. I wish I could have known her." She was a lot like you, actually. Fierce when it mattered. Couldn't ignore injustice, even when it would have been easier. Drove me crazy sometimes. His smile was bittersweet. Best thing that ever happened to me, until Sophie. The moment held quiet understanding. Grief and gratitude coexisting, not contradicting. Sophie's voice interrupted from the garden door. "Elena, come see the garden. The roses are huge." Child's normalcy. Excitement about flowers and homework and small daily wonders. The greatest victory wasn't the trial verdict. It was this. Sophie being a kid again. Sophie's request came during breakfast in late May. "I want to go back to Romano's." Elena's coffee stopped halfway to her mouth. Alexander looked up from his tablet. Even Marcus, reading the newspaper at the counter, went still. Dr. Ramirez approved the idea when they called her. Confronting the trauma site with support can be therapeutic. She's ready. So, on a May evening, they returned to Michigan Avenue. The four of them, Elena, Sophie, Alexander, and Marcus, walking into Romano's like they were walking into memory itself. The restaurant had changed management after the scandal. New owners implemented policies prioritizing staff safety, panic buttons at every station, mandatory security training, cameras with redundant systems that couldn't be disabled. Elena's testimony had influenced more than just Pemberton's trial. The new manager recognized them immediately, offered Elena her job back, stumbling over apologies about how the previous management had handled things. Elena declined gently. "I'm grateful, but that's not my path anymore." They'd made reservations. Same table, chef's table by the windows overlooking Millennium Park. Sophie held Elena's hand, walking through the restaurant, small fingers gripping tight. "This is where you saved me," Sophie said clearly. Not whispering, not hiding. Other diners recognized them. Some stared, some smiled. One man stood and applauded, and Elena wanted to disappear through the floor from embarrassment. Sophie waved like she was greeting friends. Comfortable in attention, Elena still found excruciating. They ordered food, normal family dinner, conversation flowing easily. Sophie asked Elena to order for her. "You know what I like." The intimacy of that trust. The way Sophie had memorized Elena's preferences too. Knew she took her coffee with too much cream. Knew she hated mushrooms. Knew her shoulder ached when weather changed. Mid-meal, Sophie stood, quiet determination on her small face. "Sophie, we're in a restaurant," Alexander started. "People need to hear." She addressed the dining room, voice small but carrying. Every conversation stopped. "My name is Sophie Harrison. This is Elena Torres. She saved my life here. She got hurt protecting me. I want everyone to know. She's my hero and my family." The restaurant erupted in applause. Elena sat mortified, tearful, grateful, wanting to sink through expensive marble floors. Sophie sat back down, satisfied. "Okay, I'm done now." Alexander stared at his daughter. "Where did you get that confidence?" "From Elena. She taught me staying is brave." The meal continued. They ordered dessert, lingered over coffee and hot chocolate, let the evening stretch leisurely. Leaving Romano's, Sophie skipped ahead with Daniel, the two of them debating something about robots. Alexander walked beside Elena in comfortable silence. "She's healed more than I thought possible. Because of you. Because of time and therapy and you being present. And you. Don't diminish what you've done. I just stayed." Exactly. Outside, Michigan Avenue hummed with evening energy. Millennium Park stretched across the street. Families on blankets, tourists taking photos, life continuing in all its messy, beautiful normalcy. "Can we go to the Bean?" Sophie called back. Cloudgate's sculpture reflected the city in warped, magical ways. They walked together, strange assembled family that made perfect sense. Sophie between Elena and Alexander, holding both their hands, Daniel and Marcus trailing behind, debating engineering principles. At Cloud Gate, Sophie's reflection stretched and distorted, and she laughed at the impossible shape of herself. Elena's reflection showed her scarred shoulder through the light dress, but she was smiling. Really smiling. "Take a picture," Sophie demanded. A tourist agreed, capturing 5 people under the sculpture, Chicago skyline glittering behind them, evening light turning everything golden, image of survival, transformation, chosen family. Sophie looked at the photo on the tourist's phone. "Can you send it to us? I want to remember exactly this. This moment, this evening, this proof that trauma didn't have to be the end of the story. This moment, right here. This is what healing looks like." If you've been with us this whole journey, drop a "stayed" in the comments. And subscribe, because we have more stories about people who refuse to look away when others need them. October 2025. 1 year since the night that changed everything. The estate held a private memorial for Catherine Harrison, small gathering in the garden where Sophie had planted roses in her mother's memory. Sophie placed fresh flowers at the memorial stone, kneeling in grass still damp with morning dew. "Hi, Mommy. I'm okay now. Elena helps Dad take care of me. You'd like her. She makes terrible pancakes, but she stays when I have nightmares." Elena's presence at this family memorial, sign of integration complete. She belonged here now, in grief and joy, and ordinary moments between. Evening brought a larger gathering. People whose lives had intersected through tragedy. Agent Chen, Dr. Ramirez, Catherine's parents, even Romano's new owners who'd implemented safety policies inspired by Elena's testimony. Viktor Sokolov had sent a letter from prison, apologizing to Sophie, taking responsibility, asking forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. Sophie read it with Alexander's help, processing carefully. "I'm not ready to forgive him yet. Maybe someday." 8 years old, and understanding that forgiveness was a process, not a switch. Agent Chen updated them on the wider investigation. All conspirators convicted, some cooperating now, revealing networks of corporate espionage that went deeper than anyone had imagined. Elena's testimony had sparked federal investigations into private security failures across multiple industries. Dr. Ramirez presented Sophie's recovery as a case study in trauma resilience, with names changed, privacy protected, but the healing documented. Proof that connection could be as therapeutic as any medication. Daniel was leaving for MIT in 2 weeks. Mechanical engineering, full scholarship, future bright enough to hurt looking at directly. "I'm going to build things that help people, like you did." "I didn't build anything," Elena protested. "You built a family. That counts." Alexander made an announcement. Harrison Technologies was creating a foundation, starting with $50 million endowment for working-class heroes facing legal or financial hardship after protecting others. The Elena Torres Foundation will ensure no one loses everything for doing the right thing. Elena was embarrassed by the naming, but she understood the impact. People shouldn't need billionaires to be decent, but until systems change, this helps. Legacy built from one moment of staying when leaving would have been safer. December 2025. DePaul University's graduation ceremony filled the auditorium with families in celebration. Elena Torres walked across the stage in cap and gown, receiving her nursing degree 9 years after she'd started. Sophie sat front row, holding a handmade sign, "Elena is a nurse," decorated with glitter and drawings of stethoscopes. Alexander recorded everything. Marcus actually smiled, rare enough to be remarkable. Daniel had flown home from MIT for this. Elena's hands shook, accepting her diploma. She thought of her mother. Finish what you start, no matter how long it takes. Took 9 years of night school and double shifts and sacrifice. Took a detour through a bullet wound and federal trial. But she'd finished. Job offers arrived from multiple hospitals. Elena chose Children's Memorial Hospital, Pediatric Trauma Unit. "Kids who've been through what Sophie has, I want to help them." Sophie's reaction was immediate. "You'll be the best nurse. You already know how to stay. March 2026. Elena's first day of work. Scrubs felt strange after months of comfortable clothes at the estate. Her ID badge read, Elena Torres, RN, proof that promises kept, could survive anything. First patient, 8-year-old girl, car accident survivor, terrified of hospitals and strangers in scrubs. Elena sat beside her bed, speaking softly. I know hospitals are scary. Want to know a secret? The child nodded, tear-streaked face, watching carefully. I used to be scared of lots of things. But someone taught me that staying, even when it's hard, is the bravest thing you can do. Who taught you? A 7-year-old girl who was much smarter than me. The child smiled for the first time since admission. Elena's calling, found through the strangest path imaginable. Evening return to the estate felt like coming home. Sophie doing homework at the kitchen table. Alexander cooking dinner, new hobby, questionable results. Daniel video calling from MIT, trolling his sister about her experimental recipes. How was first day? Sophie asked. Scary, good, right. That's how I felt going back to Romano's. You're a good teacher. I learned from the best. Dinner was chaotic. Alexander's cooking still experimental. Sophie critiquing with 8-year-old honesty. Daniel trolling via video screen. It was loud and messy and perfect. After Sophie slept, Elena and Alexander sat on the porch. November cold had given way to March thaw, spring arriving slowly. You happy? He asked. I'm not sure I know what that feels like yet, but I'm okay. That's more than I had a year ago. Catherine would have loved seeing Sophie this way, healed. I wish I could have met her. In a way, you're continuing what she started, protecting Sophie, loving her. I'm not replacing. You're not replacing anyone. You're adding to. That's the point. Sky over Kenilworth showed stars despite city glow. Elena thought about trajectory, from studio apartment to mansion, from invisibility to chosen family. Cost was everything she'd built. Gain was everything she needed. Thank you, she said, for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for staying when everyone else walked away. Inside, Sophie called. Elena, can you read bedtime story? Coming. She stood, cross-threshold from porch to warmth, from past to future, from invisible to essential, from surviving to staying, and that, finally, was enough. Elena's journey from that Chicago restaurant to this moment, it's about more than one act of heroism. It's about what happens when we refuse to look away from suffering, when we choose connection over safety, when we stay instead of run. If this story moved you, let me know in the comments what moment hit hardest. Was it Sophie's first words, Elena waking up in the mansion, the trial testimony, the return to Romano's? I want to hear which part made you feel something real. Subscribe for more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. About waitresses and mechanics and teachers who changed lives because they couldn't look away. About chosen families built from trauma and trust. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just stay. When everyone else walks away, when leaving would be safer, when staying costs everything you have. That's when staying matters most. Elena stayed. Sophie healed. A family was built from the wreckage. What would you do? Drop stayed in the comments if you'd make the same choice. And tell me, who in your life stayed when they didn't have to? Let's honor the people who refuse to look away. See you in the next story. Until then, stay brave, stay kind, and when it matters, stay.